Flight attendant had apologized twice for the delay, and then the airline had apologized a third time when the whole flight was scrapped and rebooked for the next morning. I stood in the terminal at 2 p.m. on a Thursday, 9 hours before I was supposed to land, and made a decision that felt romantic at the time. I wasn't going to call Claire. I was going to surprise her. Here's what I thought I knew about my marriage before that Thursday. Claire and I met at a mutual friend's engagement party. She was funny in a dry, understated way that took people a while to notice, and once they did, they never stopped noticing. She'd had a rough childhood, an absent father, a mother who moved them across 4 states chasing men who never stuck around, and she'd built herself into someone stable specifically because she'd grown up around instability. That was the story she told me anyway in year 1, in year 2, in the years when I still believed every word. My father died 3 years into our marriage. Claire was the one who handled the funeral arrangements because I couldn't function. She sat with me through probate meetings. She held my hand when the lawyer read the will, when I inherited my father's small property in Ohio, a rental duplex worth about $310,000, along with roughly $180,000 in a retirement account that rolled into an IRA in my name. She helped me set up the accounts. She helped me simplify things by adding her name to the property deed 2 years later. For tax purposes, she said, in case something happens to you. I remember thinking that was thoughtful. I remember thinking I was lucky. I did not think about any of this while sitting in the Hampton Inn parking lot. What I thought about was the burn mark on the cuff of my flannel shirt and how a stranger wearing it had known my name before I told her. I called my best friend Marcus instead of calling. Marcus was a family law paralegal, not a lawyer himself, but he'd worked in the field for 15 years and had seen every version of what I was about to describe. "Don't call her," he said before I'd even finished the story. "Don't text her, don't confront her yet. Marcus, there was a woman in my house, in my shirt. I heard you, and I'm telling you the version of you that wants to drive back there right now and scream is going to hand her the moral high ground." Came in yelling, "He scared my friend, he's unstable." Don't give her that story. Give yourself 3 weeks. Find out what's actually going on before you say a single word. I didn't understand yet why he was being so careful. I thought he was overreacting. I would understand within 2 days. We'd been married 6 years, together for 8. I was 41 years old. I ran a small structural engineering consultancy with 11 employees, and Claire, 38, worked in marketing for a regional hospital network. We didn't have kids. We'd tried. It hadn't worked. And somewhere around year 4, we'd stopped talking about it, the way couples do when a wound scars over instead of healing. I loved her. That's the part people don't want to hear in these stories, but it's true. I loved her in the unglamorous way. I knew she took her coffee with too much cream. I knew she cried during dog food commercials. I knew the specific hum she made when she was falling asleep. I thought I knew her. The drive from the airport took 40 minutes. I picked up flowers at the grocery store near our exit, the good kind, not the sad gas station kind, and I felt genuinely happy pulling into our driveway. Her car wasn't there, which didn't concern me. She sometimes carpooled with a coworker. I let myself in with my key. The dog, Biscuit, came skidding around the corner, and I heard a voice call out from upstairs, "Babe, did you forget your key again?" Not Claire's voice. I stood in the entryway holding grocery store flowers like an idiot while a woman I had never seen before came down our staircase in my flannel shirt, stopped 3 steps from the bottom, and looked at me with an expression that took a full 2 seconds to shift from irritation to alarm. "Who are you?" I asked, because it was the only question that made sense. She stopped, looked past me at the open front door like she was calculating an exit route. "You're Daniel." She knew my name. That detail sat in my stomach like a stone. "Where's Claire?" "She's not. She went to get lunch." A lie I would learn later, told badly, too fast. I heard the shower shut off upstairs. Not Claire in the shower then, since Claire was apparently out getting lunch. Someone else was in my house, in my shower. I didn't go upstairs. I want to be clear about that because in the version of this story I imagined for years, the version where I catch someone cheating, I always pictured myself storming through the house, kicking down doors, screaming. That's not what happened. What happened was I set the flowers down on the entry table very gently like I was diffusing something, and I said, "Tell Claire I stopped by." Then I picked up my suitcase and walked out. I sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes. I know because I looked at the dashboard clock when I got in and again when I finally started the engine. In that time, I watched a man I didn't recognize come out the side door in a towel, jog to a car parked 2 houses down, not in front of our house. I noted, parked deliberately out of sight, grab a duffel bag, and go back inside. I drove to a Hampton Inn off the highway and checked in under my own name because I hadn't yet learned that I needed to be careful. I didn't go home that night or the next. I told Claire via text that my flight had been canceled and rebooked, technically true, and that I was staying at a hotel near the airport because I had an early morning connection for a client site visit. Another lie, but a small one, a placeholder. She responded almost too fast. "Miss you. Can't wait for you to be home." I stared at that text for a long time. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 6 years of marriage. I logged into our joint bank account from my phone and actually read the transaction history, line by line, instead of glancing at the balance and moving on. There was a $4,200 charge to a moving and storage company I didn't recognize, dated 6 weeks earlier. There was a recurring $650 monthly payment to an address services company, the kind people use to get a second, private mailing address. There were 3 cash withdrawals of $800 each, just under the $1,000 reporting threshold I vaguely remembered from a news story, spaced 2 weeks apart. None of it screamed affair. All of it screamed exit plan. I called our accountant, a woman named Priya who'd done our taxes for 4 years, under the pretense of asking about a filing question. Casually, I asked if Claire had reached out to her recently about anything unusual. There was a pause, the kind of pause that tells you everything before the words do. "Daniel, I probably shouldn't say anything without both of you present. Priya, please." She asked me 2 months ago about capital gains exposure if she sold a jointly owned property and moved the proceeds into an account under just her name. I told her that wasn't something I could advise on without you, and she said she understood, and she never followed up. I figured it was hypothetical. The duplex. My father's duplex, worth $310,000 with her name on the deed for tax purposes. I hung up the phone and sat very still in the hotel room for a long time. I want to talk about what the next 10 days felt like, because this is the part nobody prepares you for. It wasn't the discovery that hurt the most. It was the loneliness that came after. I went back to the house on day 3 at Claire's insistence. "You're being so weird, just come home," and I played a role. I let her hug me. I let her make dinner. I sat across from her at our kitchen table and watched her lie to my face about a work trip to Denver that was, according to the credit card statement I'd already seen, actually 3 nights at a boutique hotel 40 minutes from our house. I told no one in our shared circle. Not her sister, not our neighbors, not the couples we did game nights with. Marcus had warned me. The second this becomes a story other people know, she'll hear about it from someone and she'll start covering tracks faster than you can find them. You need her to think everything is normal while you build your case. So I became an actor in my own marriage. I laughed at her jokes. I asked about her day. I lay next to her at night, running through what I knew, what I suspected, and what I still needed to find. Hardest part was Biscuit. Honestly, our dog, 7 years old, a rescue mutt we got together in year 2. He didn't know anything was wrong. He just wanted to be near both of us, and every time he curled up between Claire and me on the couch, oblivious, I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as grief for a life that was already over, even though the woman living it with me didn't know I knew that yet. I found out the man's name on day 6. His name was Trent Alvarez, and he wasn't a stranger to me at all. He was a project manager who'd worked with a subcontractor on 2 of my company's builds, 3 and 4 years earlier. I had shaken his hand at a site inspection. I had emailed him about concrete pour schedules. He'd been in my orbit the entire time, invisible, the way betrayal usually is until it isn't. Marcus connected me with a private investigator named Renata Cho, a former insurance fraud examiner who now did mostly matrimonial work. I met her at a diner 2 towns over, somewhere no one we knew would recognize us. "Here's what I need you to understand," Renata said, sliding a folder across the table before I'd even ordered coffee. "You called me because of a woman in your shirt. That's not actually your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is financial, and it's been in motion for a lot longer than you think." She'd pulled property records. 6 weeks after our anniversary, an anniversary where Claire had cried, actually cried, and told me she'd never loved anyone the way she loved me, she had filed paperwork with a real estate attorney to explore a partition action on the Ohio duplex. Because her name was on the deed, she had a legal pathway to force a sale and claim half the proceeds, regardless of the fact that the property had come from my father's estate, and she had contributed nothing to its value. Renata had also found the storage unit. The $4,200 charge wasn't moving costs. It was a 5-month prepayment on a climate-controlled unit rented under Claire's maiden name. Inside, according to the access logs Renata had legally obtained through a contact, were deposits made on 11 separate occasions over 4 months. And then there was Trent. Renata had photographs, legal, taken from public sidewalks, nothing invasive, of Claire and Trent at a restaurant 40 minutes outside our town, at a hotel, and once, damningly, at a real estate office, the 2 of them looking at listings together with an agent 6 weeks before I'd walked in on the woman in my shirt. Wait. Stopped her there. "Who is the woman, the one in my house?" Renata's expression flickered with something like sympathy. "That's the part that's going to be hardest to hear. Her name is Jess Alvarez. She's Trent's sister. Claire's been letting her stay at the house during the week, using it as a kind of home base, while Claire and Trent have been doing overnight trips to look at property together upstate near where Trent's already got a lease signed on a house. A lease, already signed, under both their names." "How long," I asked, "has this actually been going on?" Renata looked at her notes. "Based on the earliest financial and location patterns, I could establish at least 14 months. 14 months. Half of it happening while Claire cried during our anniversary dinner and told me she'd never loved anyone the way she loved me. I did not confront Claire that week or the next. This was the hardest part of the entire ordeal, sitting on evidence that made my hands shake every time I reread it, while continuing to live beside her as though nothing had changed. Marcus and Renata, together, laid out the strategy. Because Claire's name was on the deed to my father's property, a straightforward divorce filing risked a messy, expensive fight over an asset that was never supposed to be marital property in the first place. Smarter move, the one that would actually protect what my father had left me, was to first establish, cleanly and with documentation, that the addition of her name to the deed had been represented to me as a tax convenience, not a gift, and that I had never intended to convey an ownership interest. Marcus found something crucial. The notary who'd witnessed the deed transfer 3 years earlier had, per state regulation, kept a logbook. That logbook next to my signature was a handwritten note in the notary's own hand. Client stated addition is for estate tax planning purposes only, verbal confirmation both parties. It wasn't binding on its own, but combined with 2 texts Claire had sent me at the time. This is just so if anything happens to you, the property doesn't get tied up in probate again. Doesn't mean anything else. It built a real paper trail. I opened a separate account. I moved my personal paycheck deposits there. I photographed every document in the house that mattered, the original will, the property deed, insurance policies, before Claire could misplace anything. I did not touch a single dollar of joint funds beyond ordinary living expenses, because Renata had warned me that anything that looked like retaliation could be used against me later. I also did something I'm not proud of but don't regret. I let Claire keep planning. I let her think she had time. 2 more weeks passed where she took a girls' trip that was, according to Renata's confirmed findings, 3 nights with Trent at the house he'd leased upstate, the one meant to be their new life together once the duplex sale went through and funded the down payment. The final piece came from an unexpected place. Jess, the woman in my shirt, called me. I almost didn't answer. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice tight. "Trent's done this before." Not exactly this, but there was someone before Claire, a woman named Adiz. He convinced her to refinance her house to invest in a business with him. The business never existed. He kept the money. I only found out because Adiz called me, screaming 2 years ago, and I didn't do anything about it because he's my brother and I didn't want to believe it. "Why are you telling me this now?" A long pause. "Because I heard them on the phone last night." Claire asked him what happens if the duplex sale takes longer than expected because you make it difficult. And Trent said, "Then we use the backup. Her salary covers us until it clears." "I have kids, Daniel. I don't want to be part of whatever this is anymore." I asked her if she'd be willing to say that on the record. She said yes. Here's the part I'd imagined in various forms every night for 3 weeks, and here is what actually happened, which was quieter and more devastating than anything I'd fantasized about. I didn't confront Claire at home. I didn't scream in a driveway. Instead, Marcus arranged, through his firm, a mediation meeting, standard pre-divorce filing procedure, framed to Claire simply as getting ahead of things amicably, which was true, just not in the way she assumed. He arrived expecting a routine conversation about splitting assets in a marriage she still believed I knew nothing about breaking. She wore the navy dress I'd bought her for her birthday 2 years earlier. She sat down across the table from me, put her hand over mine, and said, "I know things have been distant lately. I want us to fix this." Marcus slid the folder across the table, not dramatically. Just set it down the way you'd set down a menu. "Claire, before we go further," he said, "I want to walk through some documentation because I think it's important everyone here is operating with full information." He laid it out in order: the notary logbook, the financial pattern, the storage unit, the address service, the cash withdrawals, the real estate listings for the upstate property, the signed lease under her name and Trent's, dated 4 months earlier. Photographs, not lurid, just factual: 2 people at a hotel, 2 people at a restaurant, 2 people signing paperwork at a real estate office. I watched Claire's face go through every stage: confusion, then the specific paling that comes when someone realizes the floor they thought was solid has been gone for a while. She started to speak twice and stopped both times. "I want to be clear," Marcus continued, "that this meeting isn't a confrontation. It's a starting point for how we handle the marital estate going forward. Daniel is prepared to file for divorce citing the financial patterns we've documented, and separately his attorney will be pursuing a claim to establish that the transfer of a partial interest in the Ohio property was procured through misrepresentation, given the contemporaneous written record showing the stated purpose of that transfer." "Daniel," her voice cracked, "can we talk alone?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in weeks, and I thought about the woman crying at our anniversary dinner and the storage unit and Jess in my flannel shirt and the 14 months. "No," I said, "I don't think we can." She tried anger next. "You've been spying on me, having me followed like some. This is insane, Daniel. This is not who you are." "You're right," I said. "It's not who I was. It's who I had to become, because for 14 months you were planning a life without me while spending my father's money to build it." That was the moment Jess's statement, which Marcus had already filed as a supporting affidavit, became relevant. Marcus mentioned, almost gently, that a witness statement had been provided regarding a prior, similar pattern involving Trent and another woman. Claire's face at that piece of information, the confirmation that she wasn't special, that she was a repeat performance of a scheme Trent had run before, broke in a way none of the financial documents had managed to. "He told me she was crazy," Claire said quietly, to no one in particular. "He said she was unstable and made things up." Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. "That's something you'll want to think about." The following months unfolded the way these things do when one side has documentation and the other has denial. The claim on the Ohio duplex succeeded. The court found the notary's contemporaneous log, combined with the text messages, sufficiently established that the transfer had been represented as a non-gift estate planning measure, and Claire's interest in the property was voided. Kept nothing from my father's inheritance, not the duplex, not the retirement account, both of which were confirmed as separate property. The divorce settlement split the genuinely marital assets, the house we'd bought together, the joint savings roughly down the middle, which was fair and which I didn't contest because I wasn't interested in punishment through the courts. I was interested in the truth being established and moving forward. Trent's plan collapsed almost immediately once the duplex sale fell through. The upstate lease, it turned out, required a security deposit he'd been counting on Claire to provide from her share of a sale that never happened. Jess told me, months later in a brief and awkward phone call, that Trent had moved twice since then, and that Adiz, the previous woman he'd targeted, had reopened a civil claim against him once she learned she wasn't the only one. Claire moved in with her sister. I heard secondhand, through a mutual acquaintance who still spoke to both of us, that Trent had stopped returning her calls within 2 months of the settlement finalizing, once it became clear there was no money left to build a future on. I kept the house. I kept the duplex. I kept Biscuit, who, in the strange calculus of divorce, was the thing I fought hardest for and the thing I'm most grateful I didn't have to negotiate away. It's been a year and a half since the day I walked into my own house and found a stranger wearing my flannel shirt. I still have the shirt. I threw out the burn-marked cuff version eventually, not out of anger, just because it had stopped meaning anything, but I bought myself an identical one, and I wear it sometimes on quiet Saturdays. When I take Biscuit for a walk around the block, we used to walk together as a family of 3 that turned out to be a lie built on top of a real dog and a real house and very little else. I didn't get the confrontation I fantasized about in those first 11 minutes in the driveway. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. What I got instead was better, in the way that quiet things are sometimes better than loud ones. I got the truth, documented and undeniable, delivered calmly across a table, and I got to walk away from it with my father's inheritance intact and my dignity, somehow, still mine. Renata told me once, near the end of the process, that most of her clients think the goal is to make the other person suffer. The real goal, she said, is to make sure they can never again pretend it didn't happen. Everything else takes care of itself. She was right. Claire didn't lose everything because I destroyed her. She lost everything because, for 14 months, she built her entire future on a lie, and eventually a lie that big collapses under its own weight. You just have to be patient enough and organized enough to be standing somewhere safe when it does. Think about that woman on the stairs sometimes, Jess in my shirt, looking at me like I was the one who didn't belong. In a strange way, she was the beginning of my rescue, even though neither of us knew it yet. She was the first crack in a wall that had taken 14 months to build and about 6 weeks to bring all the way down, once I stopped reacting and started paying attention. I bought new sheets for the bed. I repainted the bedroom a color Claire never would have chosen. I got a new lock installed, not because I was afraid of anyone coming back, but because it felt right to start with a door that had never been opened by anyone but me. Biscuit still sleeps between the pillows most nights, taking up more than his fair share of the bed, the way he always has. I don't mind. There's room now. There's room for a lot of things there wasn't room for before.